Hello and welcome to the webinar. Today's topic, Meet the Cloud Architects, part of the Cloud Architects series, talking about security best practices. This event is brought to you in partnership with Druva and special guest AWS. Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar. We've got a lot in store for you today covering security best practices. This is a hot topic. So thank you so much for joining us. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be serving as your moderator. We want this to be an educational event, and we encourage you to use the questions box. It's there in your audience console. I see many of you have already discovered it. I welcome your hellos and good mornings from across the United States and around the world. So thank you for those. But we also want your technical questions. We'll be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of today's webinar, so get your questions in early. We also have a best questions prize that I'll be talking about here in just a moment. And then in the handouts tab, I want to call your attention to a link to the Druva website, druva.com. It's there that you can go to discover what Druva can do for you and to sign up for the free trial that you'll hear about in the webinar. And then finally, we'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card prize at the end of the event. If you're watching this on demand, of course, the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found there in the handouts tab. And then new for this year, we're doing a best question prize. We want this to, as I said, be educational. We want to help you solve your technology challenges. We at Actual Tech Media are all former IT professionals ourselves, and we know how tough it can be to solve your technology problems. And security, like we said, is a very challenging space these days. So get your questions in for the Q&A, and you'll be entered in the best question prize drawing. Winners must, of course, meet the Actual Tech Media prize policy as well. And with that, I'm excited now to bring in our expert presenters. I welcome Mr. David Gildee, Vice President of Products at Druva, Mr. Tony McGarry, Senior Principal Engineer at Druva, and Mr. Scott Ward, Principal Solutions Architect from AWS. David, Tony, and Scott, it's great to have you. I look forward to your discussion today. Take it away.
Today, we're talking about the security pillar of the Well-Architected Framework. We're lucky enough to be joined by Scott Ward from Amazon. Scott, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And Tony, who has been with us for the series so far from Druva. Thanks, Tony, again for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Sure. Scott, do you want to give everyone a quick overview, I suppose who you are and your expertise in this area?
Sure, yeah. I am a Principal Solutions Architect working on the partner team here at AWS, and I serve as the global technical lead for our security segment. So I work with our technology and consulting partners that are focused on building security solutions for customers or guiding customers when it comes to security on AWS, ultimately helping the customers to meet their security goals. And so I'm really focused on what are partners doing, what should partners be doing to better guide and enable our customers when it comes to security and getting them really comfortable with running on AWS.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you for that. Tony, do you want to quickly introduce yourself again for people who are new to the series?
Sure. I'm a principal engineer here at Druva. I'm primarily responsible for the Cloud Ranger product. I've been working on the cloud since 2012, primarily in AWS, and overall 20 years experience in IT as a whole.
Fantastic. So thanks, guys, for that. To give everyone a sense for what we're doing here, the idea is really Amazon have built this well-architected framework, and it's a fantastic tool. And certainly we find it's a great tool to help us understand how to build and architect applications in the best possible way to run on Amazon. But there's obviously some great best practices in there anyway, which are generic and general about how to design applications. And in this series, what we're doing is running through each of the pillars of the well-architected framework, of which there's 5. And using those to discuss how you build a SaaS application on Amazon. So we've come up with this application, which is a theoretical application, an airline ticketing system. And we're talking through the 5 pillars and how you design this application to run on Amazon. So today what we're going to do is have Scott run through the security pillar and the theory behind it. What Amazon mean when they talk about the well-architected framework in relation to security and some of those best practices. And then we're going to get into some more detail around our application and understand how that actually applies to building a SaaS application on Amazon. So Scott, do you want to take us away with the security pillar?
Yeah, sure, David. Thank you. So if we kind of back up for a second, the well-architected framework is something that's existed in various forms with Amazon Web Services for multiple years. We, as customers started to kind of adopt AWS and be able to build enterprise and production workloads, we found that we were often having to go in and guide those customers to make sure that they were ready for large scale events that they knew were coming. And the well-architected framework was really an effort to get in front of that and be more prescriptive and allow customers to think about the architectures of their workloads before that really big event came and exposed gaps with their architectures. And so this framework is really a way to allow customers and AWS people who are working with customers to assess various parts of a customer's architecture and verify, if it lines up with best practices, and if it doesn't, where are the areas for improvement that the customer can actually be tackling. So, and we've based this on what we call 5 pillars. And so there's operational excellence. You really focused on that, and how are you actually able to respond to things? Are you improving over time? Reliability, what's the uptime, and how, if a component fails, can it heal itself? Can something else take over? Performance efficiency, are you running as well as you could? Are you looking at maybe, are you running the best components that are necessary for your architecture? Cost optimization, are you actually investing in understanding the cost of your workloads? Or are you doing things to adjust how you're paying for your resources and your architecture? And then finally, security, really focused on, are you implementing things that are going to make sure that your architecture, your workload, and your AWS account are going to be secure and live up to best practices and meet your own standards? And so within that security pillar, there's 5 areas that we focus on. There's identity and access management. So how are you granting people or applications access to your AWS app environment? Detection, how are you able to actually identify that there may be a threat happening in your environment, or that there is something that is out of line with your normal security best practices? Infrastructure protection, so how are you actually protecting the infrastructure that is running your workloads running in AWS? Data protection, how are you actually protecting the data that you're storing in AWS, and how are you monitoring who's accessing that data and what permissions they have? And then finally, incident response, how are you responding to identified incidents that are happening in your AWS environment when it comes to security, and how are you leveraging things like automation to be able to respond to those quickly and get the most value out of your humans? And then all of those pillars ultimately are backed by 7 design principles, which is what we're going to focus on here in a little bit when it comes to the security pillar.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. Would you say that's, the security pillar is pillar number 1 in Amazon? When this was, I suppose, being formulated and was being, developed, which really came out of a practice, it seems, in Amazon. Was that really the first and foremost thing that Amazon looked to formalize in the well-architected framework?
Well, yeah, I think the operational excellence is one of the newer pillars. So the original one was the other 4 pillars when we first released that framework. But I would say security certainly gets a lot of emphasis. It's really, security in general is our top priority at AWS, and we want to impart that on our customers as well, that you need to make sure that you are thinking about your security and that you're taking it seriously, and that you're evolving over time to make sure your security can keep up with what your business is doing. So I definitely say it's top of mind when people are looking at that the framework in general and the things that they need to focus on.
Gotcha. What would you say is the number 1 question around security that you get from customers? As you're addressing it, what's is there one that just always comes up over and over again?
I think it's really, how do I identify and keep track of everything at scale? So more and more customers they're running more resources in their accounts. They're running more AWS accounts to support various lines of business or various parts of the software development lifecycle. Being able to keep track of all of that as a whole, and being able to get visibility in a single spot and know what's going on at all times is one of the larger challenges that I hear from customers.
Okay, gotcha. Great. It's good to know. I think we've probably seen the same thing as well as for our own customers as they scale their environments. the scale is really where the challenge starts to present itself, because there's so many areas and so many surface areas for attack. Tony, what would, anything in general from a security perspective that you've seen evolve over the last, working in the cloud since 2012? Have you seen it evolve versus what you saw in data centers previously?
The main thing for me, and what I like about working in the cloud, and particularly in AWS, is how much they provide for you out of the box. And again, when you're architecting something, you always have the well-architected framework and the security pillar to go back as a point of reference. Like we have a sort of a tendency towards building serverless architectures, and one of the reasons for that is like you avoid a lot of the inherent security pitfalls that come with building on top of VMs, for example, or if you're building them in your own private data center. For example, if you're running stuff on Lambda, I mean, basically you're working with the latest and greatest OS at all times. So I mean, Amazon is taking the responsibility of patching the OS on that side and making sure it's secure and up to date. Whereas if you were running, let's just say you're running on VMs inside EC2, there's facilities there. You're largely required to look after that yourself, or you can, look after things by configuring it inside Systems Manager, managing your updates through that. But for me, it's the ability to do that again at scale, and being able to offload a lot of it onto Amazon, which is what I truly see as the biggest benefit when you're going to the cloud.
Gotcha. Scott, what would you say is the I suppose the worst security example or breach that you've seen that you can publicly talk about? Is there anything in particular that stands out that was really
there's nothing that I can publicly talk about. I certainly can't name names, but I think the most damaging ones that I've seen are where a malicious actor is able to get a hold of access keys that allow them to access a customer's environment. Those access keys can be used from anywhere. Any computer in the world that has access to the internet can use a customer's access keys to get at their AWS account, and those access keys give enough permission that allows somebody to get in and be malicious to either acquire data or to create resources for their own personal gain. Those are very common ones, and customers not knowing that they're exposing those keys, not controlling or monitoring for the use of those keys in an abnormal way, they often find out too late that that's a particular security incident that's happened.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, it's interesting. Something that for all of the products here at Druva, for all of our data protection products, we only ever use third-party access roles with an external ID. So really, to lock that down to the best possible standards that Amazon have in terms of accessing customers' environments, and then at least you don't have the situation where an access key can be exposed and used anywhere. I believe GitHub have actually started scanning all of their repositories as well to spot for access keys, so they can preemptively warn customers if they spot access keys inside of code and that may have accidentally been checked in. So it's a new threat that's come out of cloud. Yeah,
definitely.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So, Tony, do you want to give us a walkthrough of the Erlang application? I know we have a diagram here, just give people a sense for how it's evolved from the original pillar that we worked on, but just what the application does, and then how we think about it from a security perspective.
Sure. So we have talked about this in the last meeting we had. And when it comes to the security pillar and applying it to this, again, we will be looking at all of the different facets of the pillar and where we can do it. So we're working here with a serverless application design. It's been split into two different regions, and we've used as much of the Amazon services as we can, where we've seen fit that we could improve for both scale and security. So from the outset, we're using Route 53 in terms of our DNS and load balancing. We have CloudFront. We've been able to stick a web application firewall in front of that for security. We're hosting our application as a static web application of S3 buckets. And then we're employing Cognito as user management for the users logging into it. Once we get inside the VPC then, so those services are all sitting either at a global level or at a region-based level. But once we get inside the VPCs, then you can see that we've deployed our Lambda functions inside private subnets. We've got our DynamoDB and our SQS queues, which is sort of our background processing, sending emails, sending tickets, etc., from the airline system, and they're deployed at a region-based level. So one of the things, and you may see here that we've avoided the use of a public subnet, and the way we've been able to do that is by utilizing API gateway as the front to our API, which is essentially what the web front end is talking to. So by doing that, we've added a layer of security. We can lock down the subnet, lock down the access to the access points, and keep it sort of centralized. Everything is coming through one place, which is API gateway. So this architecture allows us, and sort of inherently allows us, to keep in the mindset of, keep the security mindset at all times, and automatically we're adhering to a lot of the principles we're trying to employ here with this pillar.
Excellent. That brings up an interesting point, Tony, the idea of using the likes of API Gateway in front of your, your resources, or keeping your servers or your Lambda functions private. Scott, from your perspective, is Amazon Shield, could you talk us through how that will help customers, or what it actually does to protect customers' environments?
Sure. So Amazon Shield is our DDoS protection service. So every AWS customer gets Shield Basic covered. So it's we're watching and helping protect every AWS customer against common DDoS attacks that may be happening against their environments. And so it's a free offering that all customers get. And then they can sign up for Shield Advanced, which is more specific. They get access to a DDoS response team that will apply mitigations to very specific DDoS threats against the customer's applications. They get access to a dashboard around what's happening in their environment when it comes to DDoS. They get access to be able to talk to that DDoS response team to understand what's actually going on and how they may mitigate threats as well. But it definitely is something that we're working to kind of make available to all of our customers at a basic level, to make sure everybody's got a level playing field when it comes to security and DDoS response.
Gotcha. How is adoption of Shield? Are you seeing mass adoption of it?
It comes up a lot. I can't speak to the adoption, but when I talk to customers or managed service provider partners about what they're doing for DDoS, Shield and Shield Advanced are common things that come up as far as where they're pointing customers to go when they're asking for how they actually can protect their workloads from a DDoS type attack while they're running on AWS.
Gotcha. It's one of the things I'd love to see, even from Amazon Shield Basic, is some stats around what Amazon does to protect our environments, just to get an understanding of how many DDoS attacks they prevent, or what the nature of them, so you could learn from that.
Yeah, so we actually, I don't have the link handy, but we did publish a quarterly threat response paper out there from the DDoS team and from the Shield team that gives some insight into the types of attacks and the volume of attacks that we've actually been able to mitigate successfully, or that we've seen. So we have been a little bit more public with some of that information. So you can go out there and Google that to find it. I think there was a very high profile one of like multiple terabits per second that happened not too long ago that we were able to successfully mitigate, for example. So there is some public information out there about what we're doing in that space.
Gotcha. Yeah, I remember reading at one stage just some interesting facts around the size of attacks that Amazon prevents, and in some cases, what would be huge attacks don't even get noticed by Amazon because it's so small relative to the huge infrastructure that they actually have. So it doesn't get noticed for Amazon, but for other companies, it would wipe them out. So it's quite interesting the scale that Amazon operates from that perspective.
Yes, agree.
Okay, great. All right, so thanks for the overview, Tony, of the application. I think the best thing now is if we actually talk through the design best practices of the pillar. So if we think about the first thing that we have is implementing a strong identity foundation and how that relates to the application. Scott, could you give us an overview in a bit more detail about this best practice of the pillar?
Yeah. So I think it's really important that you are enforcing least privilege and separation of duties around who is actually interacting with your environment that you're running in AWS. So when we look at all these individual components that make up this architecture, and we focus on just operation and maintenance of this, making sure that the people who can actually access this AWS environment can only access the resources that they're supposed to be able to have permissions for, and that there are, they're scoped down properly. So if somebody needs to be able to access that S3 static site bucket, that their permissions only allow them to access that bucket, and those permissions potentially are scoped down so that they can't delete objects. They can only put new objects in, for example, making sure that somebody has access to Dynamo, but they can only create tables, for example, and they can't delete tables, or they only can go in and actually read from the actual Dynamo table that's supporting this application, and they can't get access to broader Dynamo tables. So it's really important that you are coming up with and supporting an identity strategy that allows you to let people do their jobs in your environment, but not go beyond what they need to do, whether it be intentional or unintentional, and really just eliminate any any room for error or mischievous behavior when it comes to your actual AWS environments that you're running.
Gotcha. So Tony, from our application perspective, that's going to really be very much focused on the things like the roles that your Lambda functions operation and the ability, the access they have, right?
Absolutely. I was just thinking the same thing, David. So, we're talking about people actors, but also your application actors. So, I mean, you look at the roles that your application is running under, whether it's your Lambda functions or whatever's operating your underlying infrastructure, they always run in the sort of persona of a role, which is also an IAM object. And you want to, again, use strong identity foundation on them, make sure that you're applying the principle of least privilege and keep them restricted to what they need to do. And, one of the tools you can sort of use to make sure that you're adhering to that is, look at what you've actually granted them, and then use the likes of Access Advisor to make sure that, what are they actually trying to use, or what do they use on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it's a great way to help reduce the privileges. I know I've seen this many times, but you start off with, granting one permission and then another, and you keep going and adding more until something works. But really, if you don't understand it, you see people adding just admin privileges to roles like that, to a Lambda execution role, just to get it working. But you don't really understand why you've done that. So I think Access Advisor is a great tip for people to use to understand what particular roles or functions are doing.
Absolutely. Yep. And Scott, just a question from me on that aspect. The sort of the trend with Amazon accounts now is more along like enterprises having many accounts going from the 10s to 100s, and like do you see more sort of mass adoption of service control policies, people looking after from a top level, being able to enforce them, putting guardrails on for regions and things like that, so that not only is like a single account under control, but it's like done from a top down approach.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the cool thing with service control policies, which are part of the organization's service and allow you to apply, basically allow or deny policies on specific AWS services, is that you can create an account, and at that point in time, as soon as the account's created, you can push those service control policies down to baseline that account and set the framework for here's what's allowed or here's what's not allowed in that particular account as far as services and regions and what conditions need to apply. So yeah, definitely we see that used a lot. It gives customers the ability to apply that very fine grained to a particular account or to a broad number of accounts that might be part of a common organizational unit.
Yeah, and increasingly we're also seeing a sort of trend with MFA is becoming less of an add-on and more of a sort of a starting point where everyone starts with MFA. It's just MFA first. It's increasingly we're seeing customers ask for that in all of our applications.
Yep, and we see that translates often to a customer using a third-party identity provider, Okta, OneLogin, Ping, Idaptive, to act as that front layer of getting into the AWS account, either programmatically or through the management console, and using those to enforce the MFA's approaches that the customer ultimately wants them to use. So that use of a third party to help govern that is becoming pretty common with a lot of our customers.
Fantastic.
Okay, great. And the next best practice we think about is enabling traceability, which very much ties into that. When you think about auditing and logging things like logins to your accounts and who's performed what. Could you just talk us through what enabling traceability means to you from the best practice?
Yep. Sorry, was that for me?
Scott, yeah, sorry, my bad.
Yeah, sorry, no problem. Yeah, so it's really just, it's putting in place the ability to monitor and collect and actually then analyze information around what's happening in your account. So when you think about AWS as a whole, a service like CloudTrail, giving you an audit of every API action happening in your account, the ability to collect that information and use it for operational, security, or audit purposes to go in, backtrack and find out who made this change and when was it, or why did this resource change, or being able to use it to even detect a change has happened and that is not in line with our normal policies or best practices. But then even going deeper, thinking about logs related to your API gateway, logs related to your Lambda functions, being able to collect those, move them off to a centralized repository, and allowing you to analyze those to identify operational or security items that you would not be able to see visually or across a large fleet of Lambda functions that are running concurrently. And so being able to have those and being able to investigate those and apply some automation to those to detect the most common anomalies or items that you may want to take action from when it comes to security.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, one of the challenges I think we see with even internally is that we generate billions of logs on a constant basis, on a daily basis. So trying to audit those becomes hugely problematic. How would you recommend people, what tools can they use to help make this as simple a process as possible?
Yeah, so that's often not a core competency of a lot of partners or customers being able to chew through large data sets and get visibility through them. So certainly there are AWS services, Redshift, Athena, EMR, for example, that allow you to get, to chew through that data, but you still have to have a skill set being able to write those queries or be able to get the data there. So then we also see customers using log analytics partners. You've heard of the Splunks and the Sumo Logics out there as well for a long time, but companies like Alien Vault, logs.io, for example, are other partners that are allowing customers to give them all their log data, and then they leverage the partner's years of experience to allow them to search and identify patterns and anomalies within their data. So we see a lot of customers who rely on a third party to enable them to be successful in that traceability.
Okay, great. So Tony, from our perspective of the application that we're designing, this theoretical application, is that really it, that we use the likes of CloudTrail to monitor all access, and anything else we would add to the application that's not in the diagram?
Yeah, so I mean, you get some inherent things like out of using Lambda, you're going to get your CloudWatch logs, and from there, I mean, there are tools there such as building CloudWatch dashboards, which will give you some interesting stats. You can build anomaly detection on top of that, which is inherent again within CloudWatch logs. So there's a lot of stuff you can do, maybe not to the extent that some of these external providers that Scott mentioned are capable of doing, but there's definitely lots of traceability you can get just out of the nature of building on top of the Amazon services that are there and getting the different CloudWatch logs that they provide. The other thing I would mention is that the enable traceability part of the security pillar sort of overlaps a little bit with going back to the operational excellence and keep your operations as code, because one of the things, if you're looking at your infrastructure and what we've built here, like there's VPC, security groups, route tables, all that stuff that is allowing the actual traffic to route around this application. And having them as code, and deploying them as code means that you're sort of in control of how that looks at any time, and you're not looking to configure it manually, just to the console. And that can lead back then, if you have them as code, then you can look at static testing. If you're storing them in repositories, you can look at differences over time through Git, etc. So there's a nice play off the sort of two pillars there that you can use.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for that, Tony. The next component is applying security at all layers, and if you think about that from our application, I think the idea of using individual services, using VPCs, subnets, and applying security groups and ACLs. Anything else, Tony, that's important in terms of our application design when you think about applying security at all layers?
Everything that we have in this diagram, everything that we've built towards serving up this application, and beyond our initial IAM setup, and access to the console. The application has all these deployed components and different services, and each of them has security aspects that you can add. So there's protection you can add, such as we've implemented a web application firewall here, which there's certain rules you can employ to allow access, whether it be regional or particular ports or whatever you want to control. Then we have the S3 bucket, so we can employ different policies on top of that, and they can be two directional policies. We can employ the policy at the S3 bucket, or we can employ it from the role that's accessing the bucket. So there's, again, if you go through this whole application, if I was to speak to every item, there's going to be somewhere that you can apply some layer of security that comes inherently out of the service that Amazon's offering. And the nice thing about it is that in a traditional architecture, they're often things that you have to think about if you were deploying them yourself within your on-premises cloud. And having these there, again, makes you, first of all, you're looking to tick the box for security because it's right in front of you. And two, it's very easy to tick that box because it's inherently built into the service.
Okay, excellent. Scott, what does applying security to all layers mean to you or mean to Amazon when it's building applications?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, we look at it as a defense in depth approach, and then you make it sure that it's at all layers, and as you go down deeper into the layers of your architecture, that the appropriate security controls are always in place. It's not the approach of, once you get through that first layer, you're assumed to be good, so we're going to let you run wild and free and not have as many security controls in place on the rest of the stuff, because we're going to assume that you're good, and nothing on the outer layers is actually going to fail. If you hear Werner Vogel's talk, he says, everything at scale, everything fails all the time. You want to have these defense in depth approaches, because maybe a layer does fail, or a particular control gets changed at an upper layer, and so you use a defense in depth approach to make sure that the controls are still in place for those lower layers and make sure that you're adhering to the right level of security throughout the entire application that you're deploying. So whether it be operating system, the VPC that you're running, load balancers you're running, any compute software that you're running, that they all have the right security configurations in place, and that they're configured to allow perform the security job that they're supposed to do, and allow the right access for that particular component.
So it strikes me there's a lot there to think about when you take our application as an example. Each component is a different service, has its own type of security that you need to consider. So there's a lot there to think about. Is this where the well-architected framework really helps you build out that thinking so you can approach that?
Yeah. So we're going to ask you certainly things about, have you thought about access controls? Do you have the right, when you talk about your VPC, do you have the right network controls and definitions in place? When we talk about data stores, we're like, what are you using for a data store? Do you have the right permissions for accessing and interacting with your data store in place? And so these questions are meant to prompt discussion and thought. Obviously, every customer's architecture is different, so we have to ask questions that are somewhat leading to get them to talk more about what they've put in place. But yes, and some of those questions actually don't even come in the security; they might come in the under the reliability or the operational excellence aspect. But the overall goal is to make sure that they've got that they're thinking about this particular approach, and that they're giving the right permissions and applying the right security at the right layers for everything that they're building.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges I would see with customers building applications in Amazon, is just the sheer scale of what they need to do, and that understanding and the unknown unknowns, as the case may be, because there's so many services. So yeah, I think this is where the well-architected framework is essential to help guide that checklist of questions that you need to apply to each component of your application.
Yep. And I think it's also it speaks to the challenge that security teams have for AWS, is that they need to continue and invest in and educating themselves. New services come out, existing services have new features and functions. The security teams always need to be paying attention to what those are, so they can contribute in working with the application and the development teams on what's considered to be good from a configuration and from an architecture perspective.
Okay. One thing that strikes me we haven't spoken about, Jess, which is important, is the idea of the shared responsibility model. Would you mind just giving a quick 30-second overview for everyone watching to understand what it means and how they need to think about that?
Sure. Sure. Yeah. So shared responsibility model means that AWS takes care of the security of the cloud, which is really going to be the physical facilities where we're running and housing all the infrastructure that powers AWS, as well as we would have responsibility for the core software that's powering compute, network, storage, and database. And then the customer has their responsibility for security of their configuration in the cloud. So how they're choosing to protect their data at rest, in transit, how they're defining their network, patching of the operating system. They're responsible for testing and make sure the right security is in place for the applications they deploy on AWS. And customers get ownership of their data, but they're also responsible for the protection and the data controls and access controls around the data they're storing in AWS.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean that's certainly another one that you've probably seen this as well, Tony. That misunderstanding of where that line is between what Amazon are responsible for and that the customer is still responsible for a lot of the security of the application. So you need to consider both of those to really consider the full security of an application.
Yeah, I mean we've heard that story in cloud adoption. When people come to us asking about the cloud and thinking of moving, it's often one of the questions that comes up as I guess it's a bit of an idiom now, isn't it? It's had its time, but it should be well understood at this stage.
You'd hope. I mean, one of my kind of favorite stories from starting off the cloud and helping companies was a small company that had a server in their office, and we spoke about moving to the cloud. The IT pro was like, well, your data's in the cloud. That means anyone can get it. But it never mentioned the fact that the server was inside a window, and someone could have literally reached in the window and picked up the server and walked away with it. That was considered more secure. This is many years ago, but still, to your point, hopefully the idea of security in the cloud has improved significantly.
Yeah, it's that visual aspect. If people can see it, they think it's a little bit more secure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, excellent. And the next point we have is the idea of automating security best practices, which I think is, we've kind of addressed this in a number of different ways, but what does it mean to you, Scott, and how would you think about the tools that you can use in Amazon to help address that?
Yeah, I think it really speaks to defining what are your organizational security best practices and how you can define those and allow others to adopt that. And a great example is infrastructure as code and things like CloudFormation, where you are guiding people of here are the best practices for how we deploy architectures in AWS. Here's a default template that already does a lot of the configuration the way that we approve it, but also using that as an opportunity to, since it's infrastructure as code, you can scan that, be able to audit that before it's ever deployed into production and make sure that it is aligning to best practices of how you are configuring or how you've decided to configure services for running in your account. And so that allows you to have some consistency, allows you to scale, and allows people to be able to do their own work, but be able to put the right boundaries in place to make sure that you're running in a way that aligns to your security goals that for what you're doing in AWS.
Okay, I think that's a really interesting one when you think about how threats evolve over time. 10 years ago, the idea of effectively attacking infrastructure as code was never even thought about, and now it's now a surface area for attack where you don't even need to worry about the application. You can attack the CloudFormation templates as such, and it's something that you need to consider. Control access to those. They can give a very descriptive detail about how everything's architected to help hackers learn about your application and your infrastructure. So if you wonder what the threats are going to be like in another 10 years time, what we're going to be talking about is the brand new threat that has evolved from what currently is available.
Yeah. So certainly, protecting that infrastructure as code definition and then also auditing it and making sure that it's correct are going to be really important.
Okay, great. Next one, which is what that's, I suppose, dear to our hearts, Tony, the protecting data in transit at rest. And Druva being a data protection company, doing this at huge scale globally for very large companies, this is something we have a very good sense for. In terms of the application, though, here when we talk about protecting data at transit at rest, how have we addressed that in the SaaS application we're designing?
Yeah, so the nice thing again about building on top of these AWS services is a lot of them actually inherently have the feature to, you can just at a flick of a switch say you want to configure this to be server-side encrypted, such as your bucket encryption at rest. You can employ KMS keys in order to facilitate that. So you can have custom keys for your account. You can have AWS provided keys in KMS. And typically this is something that in the past or off cloud you would be looking at building yourself. you might have to code it into your application, and it becomes a much more difficult task. So it's nice having that feature there that, the encryption is really thought about as, as a primary feature now of nearly every service that gets released. And we're increasingly seeing that. And it's actually a question I want to ask Scott about was, in the past, we've seen this evolution of encryption come into these different services. And now it seems to be released, at the same time. I'm just wondering, is there a point in time where we'll see this as a pre-configured checkbox where it's actually the default rather than something you turn on?
Yeah, I think you will probably see that move to the fact that there's no performance impacts. It's considered a best practice. A lot of people are doing it. That you'll over time probably I know a lot of people build it. When we talked about that last of checking for best practices, one of those best practice checks is have you turned on encryption for the storage service that you're about to launch. So I think you'll expect to see over time probably that becomes the default and the new norm, that you actually have to turn off encryption versus turning it on when you're storing data in AWS.
Excellent. And another aspect, I guess, then when you're talking about not just at rest, but your data in transit. And for us here, I mean, you can sometimes be a little bit naive, and you're using certain services, and you might forget that the endpoint for them is actually a public endpoint, and you're actually traversing back to the public network to get back in, to the endpoint for the AWS service. Now, Amazon does provide, VPC level endpoints which you can deploy, which would, make sure you are actually traversing internally in Amazon's network. Again, are they something you see increasingly becoming more de facto?
Yeah, definitely. So you look at the Dynamo table, for example, that's in this architecture, being able to actually deploy a private endpoint in your VPC for Dynamo, so that when you are interacting with the Dynamo API, it's not traversing out to the public APIs. It's all remaining within your VPC, so that you are keeping that traffic private on the Amazon backbone. All of these API interactions are also TLS. So you have full encryption of that data as it's going across the wire by default, and so you can have that confidence that your data is encrypted and private with all the interactions that you're doing.
Yeah, and we could, if that was Dynamo, if that was RDS, we can do the same thing for RDS. It's a slightly different configuration for the endpoint, and again, the same for S3. So all of our storage mechanisms, have the same capabilities.
Yep, and one of the cool things on that is that you can also now apply policies on those endpoints that only allow traffic from certain VPCs. So this speaks back to the defense in depth, that you could say, I'm only allowing this VPC to talk to this Dynamo endpoint, so that you can further lock things down as far as who can talk to what.
Excellent.
Before we go on to the next one, I have to give a shout out here. Druva does manage data protection for a huge amount of customers globally, all built on Amazon with great scale and security in place. So if anyone watching has an interest in data security protection for endpoints, laptops, cloud workloads, data centers, reach out to us. We can help you out. So the next one that we have then, we have keeping people away from data, and then the final one, preparing for a security event. So the two of those, Scott, which is the most important to you?
Well, I think keeping people away from data, I think that's one that's not really well understood, and but it's like super important. If you hear our CISO Steve Schmidt talk at his leadership sessions at reInvent, he talks about taking goals every year about reducing the amount of the data that people internally in Amazon and AWS can actually access. And the thought here is that if you can keep the humans away from direct data access, you have the ability to ensure consistency and reduce or eliminate any chances of data exfiltration or data deletion or data modification. People make mistakes. We're humans. We have bad days. We get stuck in traffic. We're a little bit grumpy at times, but keeping people away from data is really focused on building APIs that allow people to interact with the data, but in a controlled fashion with the right parameters, building dashboards that allow access to the data so that you're not having to go in and query the data directly, and just finding other ways to control and surface the appropriate access to data without ever actually being able to get to the true data store where you can actually modify it or change it.
Okay, excellent. And then in terms of preparing for security events, is that very much built around the likes of CloudWatch notifications? I think, Tony, as you mentioned earlier, insights off your CloudWatch dashboards when you spot anomalies, then to take actions on that?
Yeah, I guess there's one aspect of being able to detect it, and the next one is once you've detected it, what do you do? And there's different ways you could do that. You can simulate these events. You could simulate a DDoS. How would you lock that down? You could simulate many different types of event, but I guess how detecting it is one side of it, and then how you act and having your company policies, your product policies as to how you deploy something or deploy people to be able to interject in that security event is also something you need to practice and be ready for.
Yep. And then measure that and see where you had failures or where things could be improved, and then go in and improve your processes for the next time that happens.
Excellent. Okay, guys. Well, thank you very much for that. I mean, it's been a great conversation. We're coming towards the end of the episode. Scott, is there any kind of pro tip or anything that you'd like to leave the listeners and watchers with before we drop off?
Yeah, I'd say just security on AWS is a journey. There's a lot of cool things that you can do and ways that customers can really improve their security posture. But it's really important to keep in mind that this is a journey. You will continue to need to be educated. You need to have a roadmap on and continue to implement and can focus on that continuous improvement of what you're doing on security. You'll never be fully done, but you can really put some pretty awesome things in place when it comes to security on AWS.
Excellent. Tony, any tip you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I mean, I guess Amazon does a great job of supplying a lot of out-of-the-box security tools. We mentioned a lot of them already, and I guess it's just to employ them wherever they are because they're there for a reason.
Excellent. And from my own perspective, I think just you use the well-architected framework, the security pillar. Go through those checklists. It will help you understand the things that you don't know or don't understand, and help raise those kind of thought-provoking questions as you're designing your application. So using the well-architected framework both at the design stage right through to the build and the deployment stage as well is important to constantly review your application and reapply those checklists and make sure that things haven't happened or security vulnerabilities haven't cropped up that you didn't think about at a previous stage. So I think that's really important as well. Well, guys, thanks very much for joining us for this session. Tony and Scott, thank you very much for joining us and appreciate your insights and expertise.
Thanks so much for having me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much for joining.
All right. Thank you so much to our expert presenters, David and Tony from Druva, Scott from AWS. A really fantastic conversation. I enjoyed that. I learned a lot. We've been answering questions throughout the presentation here, thanks to the experts at Druva. I did post over there in the questions tab the link to the practical guide to the AWS Well-Architected Framework for Cloud Architects. Make sure that you check out that link before you go. It's there in the questions tab. If you have trouble finding it, it's over at druva.com. Thank you so much for all the excellent questions that came in during the event. We've answered almost all of them. If there's a few that we didn't get back to, we'll have to get back to those post-event. So thank you for those. Before we go, I do want to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. That's going out to Austin Dixon from North Carolina. Congratulations. We'll reach out to you to deliver that prize, and we'll also reach out to the one lucky person who won the best question prize after the event. Before you go, I want to remind you to keep watching your inbox for upcoming invitations to more events in this Meet the Cloud Architects series brought to you by Druva. So there are more events still yet in this series to come. So look for an invitation. I learned a lot on today's event. I hope that you did too. Thank you so much for joining. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.